It depends. So I'm going to give a couple of data points at the ends of a continuum and then see if we can't make some sense out of this. Let's say, for argument's sake, you're a senior and you do not own your own home. You have very little as far as assets, and your sole source of income is Social Security. Bankruptcy generally is probably not a good idea for you, and most particularly, Chapter 13 is not a good idea for you. First, creditors are not allowed to go after your Social Security. With one exception, the federal government can go after your Social Security, and wouldn't you know it, they want their pound of flesh. But if you are in that scenario, well, you can be frustrated by the phone calls and the threatening letters, but there's not much that the creditors can do other than shout at you over the telephone and send you nasty letters. And if you really want to get their goat, answer the phone and tell them about your grandchildren. And no matter what the guy says, just keep talking about those lovely grandchildren. Eventually they'll give up. So on that end of the spectrum, I'm not sure bankruptcy makes any sense under any chapter. And I might add that if you're in that scenario, you simply aren't going to have the income to be able to support a Chapter 13 plan. So if you're a senior in that scenario, I don't think bankruptcy makes any sense. I have occasionally put people in that type of a scenario into a Chapter 7 bankruptcy, just because they're so sick of the phone calls that they say, yes, I understand they can't go after my Social Security, but I can't stand it. Okay, we'll pop you into a Chapter 7. Let's go to the other end of the spectrum. You made great provision for retirement. You've got a very nice house, and you've got a pretty good income from retirement. Yeah, you have Social Security, but you're pretty well heeled. But over the years, you've incurred a lot of debt. And now these creditors are harassing you and they're threatening to jump on your back till your eyes bug out. Well, in that situation, bankruptcy might be the right direction to go. And maybe Chapter 7's off the table. Perhaps you have a lot of equity in that house, or maybe your income is simply too high to qualify for Chapter 7. So in that situation, you might want to think about doing a Chapter 13. Now, the equity in the house may play a role in how much you're going to repay, and perhaps I should take a step back to sort of set the stage on what that means. So, pardon this sort of long rabbit trail, but I think it's helpful if we take a quick step into Chapter 7 for a moment. Unlike Chapter 13, in Chapter 7, we just wipe debts out without you paying a dime. And of course, from the creditor's perspective, this is a pretty heavy hit. So there are some limitations. One limitation is on what you get to keep. You get to keep some stuff, but there's at least the potential to lose possessions in a Chapter 7. So one of the things we include in a Chapter 7 petition is a complete listing of everything you own or have an interest in. And all of your assets are divided into two categories: exempt, non-exempt. You get to keep the exempt stuff. In a Chapter 7, the Chapter 7 trustee gets to take the non-exempt stuff, sell it, and have money to pay creditors. We determine whether something's exempt or non-exempt by appealing to one of two exemption tables. One table is for homeowners with equity in their principal residence. The other's for everybody else. Now, in a Chapter 7, then, it is possible that creditors could get paid something if you have non-exempt assets that the Chapter 7 trustee liquidates. In a Chapter 13, you keep all your stuff. No trustee is going to take any of your stuff. But we still go through the exercise of listing all of your assets, dividing them into exempt and non-exempt categories, because one of the requirements of a Chapter 13 plan is, over its lifetime, which in most cases is that 60-month maximum, you have to repay your creditors at least as much as they would have gotten if you had done a Chapter 7. In other words, the liquidation value of your non-exempt assets. So if you're in that, now back to our little discussion that this rabbit trail was a detour from. If you're in that situation where you're a senior, you're pretty well heeled, but you have significant debt, You want to take care of that debt. Chapter 13 might be just the right vehicle. And I did say, well, how much equity you have in your house will play a role. If you have non-exempt equity in your principal residence, then that will go into calculating how much you have to repay over the life of the Chapter 13 plan. Now, in that Chapter 7, if you have non-exempt equity in the house, you might end up losing the house or else having to buy that equity back from the Chapter 7 trustee. In Chapter 13, you keep everything, so that means the house is in no jeopardy, but that non-exempt equity dollar amount will go into determining how much you have to repay. So, getting back to our original question, is Chapter 13 a good option for seniors? It can be. It can also be a terrible option for seniors. So if you're in that impecunious senior status, probably don't even bother with bankruptcy. But if you're in that well-heeled status, then Chapter 13 might be the right way to deal with debts. Now, there's one final caveat here. Chapter 13 has debt ceilings. There's one debt ceiling for secured debts. There's another debt ceiling for unsecured debts. If you exceed either of those ceilings, you are ineligible for Chapter 13. And in that situation, the next stop in the bankruptcy train is Chapter 11, which is not for the faint of heart. It's the most complicated chapter in the bankruptcy code, but it's a very powerful tool. And so I like to think of it as sort of like Chapter 13 on steroids. It's a quantum leap more complicated than Chapter 13. But Chapter 11 can also be a good way to deal with debts if you're a senior and your debts exceed those debt ceilings and you have the resources maybe to pay creditors over time, but you need that time. And one of the great things that both Chapter 13 and Chapter 11 will give you is time. Perhaps the most precious thing we have in this life. So it'll give you time to service the debt. If you're a senior, there is also the question of what's your health like? And I don't mean to be mawkish or maudlin here, but if you are, let's say, on the way out, I'll word it delicately, Chapter 13, Chapter 11, they have a multi-year commitment associated with them. So if you're going into one of those plans, well, then the question arises, will you have enough time to be able to complete the plan? That's getting into a realm that is perhaps relegated to a consultation, because now we're getting into a case-by-case scenario. Sometimes people want to do a bankruptcy just because the heirs may be competing against creditors in inheriting the assets, and the person who is the senior might decide, I would like to get rid of these debts to benefit my heirs. Now we're getting into a realm that doesn't really lend itself to nice, simple yes, no, 2, 3, 4, 5 type answers. And for that, I think we need to talk. So if you are in that situation, give me a call.